It isn't often that a Hollywood legend leans in and admits that behind the silver screen sheen, whispers of doubt and pain lurk just out of sight. At 69, Tom Hanks, the golden boy of American cinema, has finally opened the vault on one of his most iconic roles. Forrest Gump made $677 million worldwide, becoming a cultural touchstone for a generation. But few know that on the second day of shooting, the revered director uttered a single line that would haunt Hanks for years. He had pushed himself so hard to become the windswept, gentle soul. Every take felt like a marathon through uncharted terrain. Each morning on that Atlantic coast beach, Hanks would lace up his running shoes before dawn, muscles aching from 100 laps the day before. Crew members whispered that he looked spent, haggard, yet unstoppable. Blisters formed beneath his socks, each stride demanding every ounce of grit he could muster. When the camera rolled, exhaustion hid behind Gump's wide-eyed innocence, turning every frame into living proof of a man who refused to quit. He wouldn't tell the studio or his co-stars. Those 3 dots of pause before, "I'm sorry I had to go," came from a place of genuine fatigue and raw emotion that not even Hollywood had witnessed before. Yet the real turning point arrived long before that beach scene. On day 2 of principal photography, Robert Zemeckis watched Hanks repeat the same line over and over until frustration spiked behind his gentle grin. After the 20th attempt, Zemeckis laid down his clapperboard and said, "Tom, you're pushing too hard. Stop acting. Just live." Those 5 words cracked open the performance that would become legend. Hanks later recalled how liberating it felt to release control, to stop chasing perfection, and instead surrender to authenticity. That shift transformed the role from mere imitation to embodiment, and from that moment on, Hanks walked the line between actor and character so seamlessly that audiences would mistake Gump's heart for his own. Contrast framed every moment of this production. On one hand, you had the fairy tale success of an actor whose every choice seemed bulletproof, whose charisma lit up any marquee. On the other, a painstaking grind, a daily wrestle with invisible doubts that threatened to swallow even the brightest name. At lunch, the Hanks would retreat to a makeshift corner of the craft service tent, closing his eyes as though he risked detachment from his own body. He ate sparingly, mindful of how each calorie could impact the next running scene. While the rest of the industry celebrated Gump's inevitable smash hit, Hanks labored silently, believing every misstep might unravel months of his life's work. But even in that silent struggle, Hanks found an unlikely sanctuary. The faint smell of salt on his skin and the surf's constant lullaby. Late nights would find him seated alone on an overturned bucket, watching the waves roll in as if they carried an unspoken message. This ritual grounded him, reminding him that Gump's journey was as much about human perseverance as it was about cinematic spectacle. It was here, under the veil of darkness, that he wrote his most personal letters to home. Unfinished notes to his children that spoke of longing, hope, and the quiet terror of losing himself in a role. Those letters never left the set. Hanks's silence became legendary backstage. When extras speculated about his stony calm, makeup artists whispered about the slow reveal of a tear as if it arrived on cue. Yet those tears weren't cues. They were levers releasing weeks of tension. During the filming of the infamous bench scenes, he told his stand-in to steal an extra candy before each take, just to see the surprise flicker across her face. Then, when the camera rolled, that genuine glitch in Gump's world offered glimpses of Hanks's authentic curiosity. An artist rediscovering joy amidst the grind. It was this delicate interplay between planned precision and spontaneous truth that set Forrest Gump apart from any role before it. The production was a tapestry woven with contrasts, blistering sunlit days, and shivering dawns on damp sand, perfect takes and flubbed lines, raucous laughter and stifled tears. Through it all, Hanks learned that true genius isn't found in flawless execution, but in the messy, vulnerable in-between moments. He discovered that handing over control to the moment could yield something far richer than any carefully calculated performance. And though Gump's tale is one of innocence and wonder, Hanks's own story on set was a crucible. A test of endurance, humility, and the fierce love for craft. Now, at 69, he's ready to pull back the curtain, to confess the moments of doubt that made Forrest's optimism all the more extraordinary. On the morning of the third week, the air on set carried a different weight. Word had spread that Hanks had finally shared a draft of his private journal entries with Zemeckis, entries filled with raw confessions about self-doubt. The director paged through lines describing trembling knees under the bench, the sting of salt water entering fresh wounds, and a gnawing fear that the world would see only strain, not soul. In response, Zemeckis paused the shoot and simply said, "People want to feel that honesty. Give them everything you've got." That permission acted like a salve on Hanks's psyche. Rather than fighting the fatigue, he leaned into it, etched wariness into every facial contour, let his voice quaver with the truth of silent suffering. By embracing vulnerability, he elevated Gump's spirit into something unbreakable, ironically built on cracks. Later that day, during a scene with Sally Field, Hanks's performance took on a nuance no one saw coming. As Gump confided fears about running away, about leaving behind everyone he loved, Hanks's eyes brimmed with tears he refused to wipe away. Field, momentarily stunned, improvised a soft touch on his arm that wasn't in the script. The camera caught it, unplanned, and Zemeckis called, "Cut," only after letting the take play out in full. That unpolished moment became the emotional cornerstone of their on-screen chemistry. It underscored a simple truth. The most memorable scenes are those that breathe with unscripted humanity. For Hanks, this felt like alchemy, transforming personal anguish into shared catharsis. Amid triumphs, there were still days when the physical toll threatened collapse. One afternoon, a production assistant discovered him collapsed in a corner of the hair and makeup trailer, head lolling to one side, a thin sheen of sweat across his forehead. She gently shook him, expecting him to snap awake, but instead found him murmuring Gump lines as if in a trance. The assistant alerted the medical team, who advised a full day off. Hanks refused. He told them, "We owe it to the story." So they moved the schedule around, slotted him into less strenuous close-ups that day, but by sundown he insisted on returning to the running tracks. His insistence was both admirable and reckless, a balancing act between dedication and self-destruction that few in Hollywood dared attempt. The cinematographer, Don Burgess, recalls one sunrise shoot where the sky blazed pink and gold. Hanks, feet swollen, limped onto the sand to capture a silhouette shot, while most actors would have accepted a stand. Hanks declared it, "My moment." He ran a single slow motion lap, each footfall echoing through the lens. Burgess pressed record, whispering into the camera's monitor, "This is why we endure." That single shot, edited into pivotal montage sequences, crystallized Gump's essence, an ordinary man propelled by unwavering faith and relentless heart. It remains one of the film's most iconic images precisely because it was born out of sacrifice rather than convenience. Between scenes, Hanks often escaped into Zemeckis' trailer, where the director had installed a small bookshelf of scripts and classic novels. Hanks would sit cross-legged, flipping through pages of Steinbeck or Salinger, drawing parallels between literary wanderers and his character's journey. These quiet interludes, away from lights and cameras, nurtured a mental refuge. Zemeckis observed that Hanks would emerge with a slightly different posture or a flicker in his smile, subtle shifts that spoke volumes on screen. This depth, the director believed, couldn't be forced. It bloomed only when an actor surrendered to the moment, when creativity became an act of trust rather than calculation. As wrap day approached, the cast and crew sensed a bittersweet undercurrent. They organized an after-hours gathering around the beach bonfire, where anecdotes flowed freely. Stories of wardrobe malfunctions, rogue crabs interrupting takes, and the time Hanks challenged anyone to a push-up contest just to prove he still had energy. Laughter mingled with nostalgia, but when someone toasted, "To Tom, our Gump," Hanks fell silent. In his speech, he confessed that every stride, every blistered foot, had whispered truths about his own limits and latent strengths. He admitted gratitude for the pain, which had unlocked a reservoir of empathy he never knew he possessed. In that circle of lantern light, the hero of Hollywood revealed himself as a man reborn, each scar on his body mirrored by one in his spirit. Now, decades later, Hanks speaks of those days not with bitterness, but with reverence. He frames the grueling process as a rite of passage, a forging fire that tempered artistry. He acknowledges that without those trials, Forrest Gump would have remained a charming caricature, rather than an enduring symbol of human resilience. His confession isn't about regret, it's an invitation. He urges aspiring actors and dreamers to embrace the discomfort that lies beneath the spotlight, to recognize that true transformation demands vulnerability as much as vision. At 69, Tom Hanks holds no illusions about glamour. Instead, he offers the raw testament of triumph born from unfiltered truth. On the final week of shooting, the set seemed charged with an unspoken energy, as if everyone sensed they were carving cinematic history into the sand. Early morning calls had shifted to first light, and Hanks was already lacing up before most crew members stirred. The air smelled of salt, surf, and anticipation. He paused at the edge of the water, toes sinking into wet grains, took a breath, and whispered to himself, "This one's for truth." Then he sprinted. Camera 3 rolled in slow motion, capturing a stretch of muscle and willpower fused into every limb. Years later, Hanks would admit it was the purest expression of Gump's spirit, a culmination of every blister, every doubt, and every remarkable revelation gifted by Zemeckis' simple directive, "Stop acting and live." That evening, as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, the crew gathered around fold-out tables stacked with sandwiches and lemonade. But there was no small talk. Instead, the Zemeckis walked through each shot of the previous day, replaying footage on a portable monitor. He pointed to Hanks's silhouette against the amber sky and said, That moment? That's authenticity. Production assistants murmured their agreement. Grips wiped tears from their cheeks. In that quiet circle, the line between actor and character dissolved. Forrest Gump became not just a story of an everyman, but a living testament to the beauty of imperfection. Before wrapping the beach sequences, the wardrobe department presented Hanks with the original red check suit, carefully preserved despite the sand, sweat, and salt. The fabric was thin now, the buttons loose, but to Hanks it felt like armor. He donned the ensemble one last time, standing knee deep in surf as the camera receded. For that final take, he spoke Gump's closing lines under his breath. Eyes focused on a distant point, as if surrendering to something beyond sight. The cinematographer called. Action, and the waves whispered an unspoken soundtrack. Hanks paused mid-sentence, eyes flickering with unshed tears. Then he finished, voice soft but unwavering. Lot by lot, that take became the soul of the entire film. Back on dry land, Zemeckis approached Hanks and handed him a leather-bound notebook. Inside, every crew member had contributed a letter, stories of how Hanks's dedication had inspired them, confessions of what they'd learned about perseverance from watching him run. Hanks flipped through pages, his throat catching. In that moment, he recognized the film's true legacy, a shared journey of human connection. Gump had run across America, but in truth, the entire team had made a cross-country trek of the spirit together. As the weeks turned into months and Gump's premiere loomed, Hanks retreated to his home office, where he revisited his set letters. He transcribed portions into a speech he planned to give at the world premiere gala. Under chandeliers and flashing bulbs, Hanks stepped onto the stage. He began by quoting that haunting directive from Zemeckis: "Stop acting. Just live." He explained how those words had unlocked the performance, raised the stakes, and taught him that vulnerability is the truest performance of all. The audience, comprised of Hollywood's glitterati and everyday fans, sat in stunned silence before erupting into applause that lasted minutes. The speech became legendary, quoted in magazines, etched into online forums, and passed from one aspiring actor to another as gospel. Yet for all the accolades, Hanks refused to let sentimentality dull his perspective. He remained grounded, believing that the film's power lay not in awards or box office figures, but in its capacity to spark empathy. Months later, he received a letter from a veteran who said Forrest's resilience had helped him through PTSD. Another came from a teacher who used the film to inspire students facing homelessness. And a child wrote that Gump's purity had given her courage when she felt lost. These letters found their way into Hanks's personal archive, oeuvres of real people whose lives intertwined with his art. Today, when asked why he finally chose to share these behind the scenes struggles at 69, Hanks smiles gently. He explains that time provides perspective, and that scars tend to fade into stories better told when the heart is ready. He acknowledges the privilege of a life lived in front of cameras, but confesses he's still the same boy who once ran away from a broken home, seeking stability. In revealing his vulnerabilities, he hopes to remind everyone that courage isn't an absence of fear, but the audacity to run through it. In a special televised interview following his confession, Hanks sat in a simple chair under warm lights. He revisited key moments: the initial clampboard directive, the letters from cast and crew, the beach at dawn, the final red check suit. with each recollection. His voice quivered just enough to hint at the raw nerve beneath the legend. Viewers across the globe tuned in, the many for the first time learning the true cost of a role they'd cherished. Social media buzzed with newfound appreciation. Hashtags trended, and a fresh wave of Gump nostalgia swept through cinemas, sparking special screenings of the 25-year anniversary restoration. Through it all, Hanks's confession has become more than an anecdote. It's a blueprint for anyone chasing creativity under pressure. It's proof that even the most revered paths are paved with discomfort, that joy and pain often arrive hand in hand, and that magic on screen emerges from the willingness to expose one's raw edges. At 69, Tom Hanks hasn't just revealed a behind-the-scenes anecdote. He's offered a masterclass in authenticity, a blueprint for living fully and embracing the wounds that shape us. Weeks after the revelation, the ripple effect of Hanks's confession began to appear in unexpected places. Casting calls for dramatic roles now included notes encouraging actors to explore vulnerability over perfection. Acting coaches referenced the Gump directive in workshops, teaching students to surrender to authenticity rather than chase flawless technique. Film schools appended scenes from Hanks's Olympic-style runs into lesson plans as case studies in marrying physical endurance with emotional truth. In social media groups for performers, hashtags like #FayLiveDonTact and #HiGumpMoment trended for days, with aspiring actors posting personal anecdotes of how they ran through their fear. In auditions, even seasoned professionals admitted they'd never realized how much strain hides behind a single line until Hanks laid it bare. Meanwhile, Hanks himself found new purpose in these conversations. He began drafting a memoir titled Behind the Run, weaving together diary entries from the Gump shoot with reflections on a lifelong career of balancing public persona and private struggle. In early chapters, he describes discovering that discomfort on set often mirrored the unrest in his own heart. From childhood dislocation to bouts of performance anxiety that lingered long after applause faded. He invites readers into moments of near sabotage, like the time he seriously considered quitting before a scene in Philadelphia, or the night he contemplated abandoning the cast of Apollo 13 mid-flight on NASA's Vomit comet. Yet each story circles back to redemption, small epiphanies that emerged only after confronting fear head-on. To promote the memoir, Hanks sat for a rare round of interviews on major talk shows, his tone a mix of candor and gentle humor. When asked if he feared losing his status as Hollywood's Boy Scout, he quipped, "The nothing's more human than being scared." But his eyes softened as he described hearing from fans who felt less alone after discovering that their hero had endured something so raw. One mother wrote that reading about Hanks's tears during the bench scenes gave her permission to cry openly at her own child's school play. A veteran, letter from the Gulf War, confessed that watching Gump run pushed him to start therapy for PTSD. These messages lit a spark in Hanks that art's most enduring gift is not escape, but empathy. Back on the lot where new shows were filming, producers began approaching Hanks with consulting offers. Did he want to coach actors on embodying characters under extreme conditions? He declined. His confession was never meant to set him up as guru. Instead, he chose to partner with a nonprofit that brings arts education to underserved communities, believing that creative expression holds healing potential. He hosted an intimate workshop in a repurposed warehouse, standing on a scuffed wooden floor and guiding a small group through trust exercises inspired by his own set rituals, breathing with the ocean, writing unsent letters, improvising dialogue to capture spontaneous emotion. With each participant's breakthrough, Hanks beamed, not as a legend on a pedestal, but as a fellow traveler on the road of authenticity. In parallel, filmmakers revisited Forrest Gump for a special anniversary edition, including a new documentary featurette on set hardships and behind the scenes confessionals. Archive audio of Zemeckis and Burgess recounting the blister trial, and crew members sharing how Hanks's resilience lifted their own spirits gave fans a fuller picture of the collective struggle. The release sold out midnight screenings in cities worldwide, and for the first time, viewers lingered after the credits to exchange impressions of Gump, their hero who stumbled, blood, yet ran on, much like we all do. This renewed interest prompted a broader cultural shift. In podcasts about creativity, Hanks's story became emblematic of the essential tension between ambition and well-being. Doctors and psychologists weighed in, discussing how sustained physical or emotional strain can fuel breakthroughs but must be balanced with self-care. Articles in major outlets argued that while Hanks's grit is legendary, it also underscores unanswered questions about the toll we expect artists to endure in the name of art. These conversations transcended Hollywood, influencing how people in any field viewed their own challenges as potential doorways to growth rather than roadblocks to perfection. As autumn hues tinted the landscape, Hanks returned to the actual bench prop, now preserved in the Smithsonian for its cultural significance. During a private ceremony honoring his career, surrounded by family and longtime collaborators, he placed his hand on the weathered wood and spoke quietly. "This bench holds more than lines. It holds our shared heartbeat." His granddaughter, peering curiously, asked why he'd run so far. Without hesitation, Hanks replied, "Because sometimes you have to break yourself down to find out what keeps you going." That simple truth, shared in hushed tones, encapsulated the revelation he delivered at 69, that behind triumph lies vulnerability, and behind every hero's stride is a story of perseverance no lens can fully capture. Months have passed since Tom Hanks first peeled back the curtain on those early days of Gump's journey. Yet the echoes of his revelation continue to reverberate across the industry and beyond. His candid admission that he battled physical exhaustion and emotional upheaval while running 8 to 10 miles daily ignited conversations that stretched from acting studios to mental health forums. People who had always seen Hanks as the embodiment of unflappable charisma suddenly recognized the delicate balance between visible success and invisible struggle. The confession reminded them that behind every iconic performance lies a tapestry of human vulnerability woven into each frame. And while the red carpet premieres have long receded into memory, the lessons born from that sand and salt water endure. Looking back now, it seems almost impossible that such a jovial, approachable star could have endured those grueling routines without breaking. Yet Hanks insists he would undergo it all again if it meant tapping into that same well of authenticity. "Every drop of sweat reminded me," he says, "that the role demanded sacrifice equal to its reward." From the blistered quads to the dawn, lit remembrances on the shore, those trials remain lodged in his muscles and his memory. Somehow, the simple act of running transformed from a physical test into a metaphor for life's relentless pace, a reminder that forward motion often arises from adversity rather than ease. Weaving that insight into his everyday life became Hanks's true compass long after the cameras shut off.